Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next video in the Electoral Systems series. We're starting off bright and strong with the most basic system you can possibly do. First past the post. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Now, before I get into the rest of the video, I will just like to note again that my regular video on Thursday is going to be different. This week, we are doing a live stream from 5 Eastern Time to just after 7 Eastern Time, covering the first Canadian leadership debate. Conservative Party of Canada leadership debate. The only reason why this might not happen is if I cannot find a live stream, but I'm pretty sure I will be able to get a live stream found. So I would like anyone who's interested to arrive. There'll be some Q&A before and afterwards if anyone has any questions about either the leadership race or anything else related to the channel. And I hope I hope people show up. It'll be fun. Now, without further ado, let's start the video. Woohoo! So, what is first past the post? How does it work? It's very simple. Every voter gets one vote. Candidate who gets the most votes wins. It's probably not possible to come up with a more simple voting system. Now, I'll just go back for a second. So, just to reiterate to everyone, how I'm assessing this is in the first video of the series, I outlined a bunch of criteria and why I think they're particularly important. And using those criteria, I will be going through the system, or each criteria, and showing whether this current system I'm discussing satisfies it or not. And at the end, based off of all the ones that have been satisfied or not, I will then place it on a tier list and articulate why I've put it in that tier list. Now, going forward, so we have majority winner. Majority winner, basically, if a candidate is ranked first by majority voters, then that candidate must win. As we can see here in this example, Kim has more than 50% of the vote. By rules of first past the post, the candidate with the most votes wins. Kim has the most votes, so Kim wins. Therefore, first past the post satisfies majority winner. Nice and simple. Majority loser. So, majority loser, to satisfy this, a majority of voters must prefer, or if a majority of voters prefer every other candidate over a given candidate, that candidate must not win. In this case, we have 3 candidates, A, B, and C, and 3 types of voters with the following preferences. A majority of voters prefer B or C over A, as if B was not running, then 60% would vote C, and if C was not running, 60% would vote B. Again, this assumes 100% turnout. All of these examples will assume 100% turnout. Therefore, first past the post does not satisfy majority loser criteria because A wins even though they would lose against any other candidate if it was a 2-party race. Moving on, Condor Winner. This is a similar one, though not quite the same. So basically, the candidate who wins the most votes in any head-to-head election wins. So, again, same scenario, 3 types of voters, 3 candidates, A, B, and C, and 3 types of voters with the following preferences. A wins the race because they have 40% of the vote by first past the post, but if one candidate was dropped off the ballot, so it was only 2 candidates, then B would win, because if C dropped off, so it was B versus A, B would get 60% of the vote because they're the second choice of type 3 voters, and A would get 40%, so it'd be 60 to 40. Similarly, if A dropped off the ballot, B would get 70% of the vote because they're the second choice of the type 1 voter, and they would win 70 to 30. However, B loses the actual election because of how first past the post works. Therefore, first past the post does not satisfy the Condor Winner. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but whatever. Condor loser. This is essentially the same in this case as majority loser. I think in most cases this is going to be true, but not always, so I'm going to include them anyways, but in this particular case, they are identical. Next one here, monotone. So, again, consider 3 candidates, A, B, and C, and 3 types of voters. Type 1, type 2, type 3. This time it's not percentage, this is absolute voter because it's just easier. So the result here is C wins with 40 votes, and B and A are tied at 30. So how monotone criteria works, to refresh, ranking a candidate higher on a ballot shouldn't reduce their chance of winning. In this case, if any number of voters switch from type 1 or type 2 to type 3, the results stay the same. In other words, in first past the post, it is simply not possible to reduce a candidate's chance of winning by voting for them. Simple. Moving on to consistency. So in consistency, if an election is divided arbitrarily into several parts, all of those elections garner the same result, then an election of the entire electorate also garners that result. So we have these two areas here, and I should note we are keeping these voter preferences. I just did not think to put them here. So under first past the post, A wins area 2, A wins area 1, and A also wins overall because in each case they have the majority of the votes. Easy. Now, therefore, first past the post satisfies this criteria. Moving on to participation. So in participation, voting in an election cannot cause a voter to get a less preferred outcome. Consider an election with 3 candidates. The electorate overall prefers electorate overall has C equal to A, and both of them greater than B. In other words, there's a tie between candidate A and C. Bob prefers candidate A to B to C. If A is going to win, Bob voting cannot cause A to lose. If A is going to lose, Bob voting could cause A. Oh, that should say to win. Yeah. I think there's a marker here. Pen. Win. Win. This is important. If A is going to lose, Bob voting could cause A to win. There we go. Further on, now we have later no harm. I'm not going to go into this one. Well, I guess I should, because I should explain it to people. So later no harm, a voter giving a rank to a less preferred candidate cannot harm their more preferred candidate. This does not apply. First past the post does not have ranked ballots. Oops. Similarly, later no help does not apply because there's only single candidate ballots. Later no help, basically, ranking a candidate down the ballot should not help the more preferred candidates of the contestant, of the voter, sorry. Easy. Different tier memberships. This is self-evident. There is only one tier membership, and first past the post, you only have constituency level members. Resistance to government change. This is slightly more complicated, but we go into it anyways. So basically, put the wrong note here in front of my face. Resistance to government change is how difficult it is for a majority of voters to change who forms the executive. Or, in more simple terms, when you're talking about a constituency race like first past the post, how hard is it to change the winner of the race? So again, assume 2 candidates, A, B, and C, and 3 types of voters, type 1, type 2, type 3. A is going to win the race 40 to 39. In this scenario, it takes a minimum of 2 voters, or not in this scenario, sorry. In first past the post in general, it takes a minimum of 2 voters to change the preference, to change the winner. I guess I should amend that. It is a minimum of 1. My handwriting is not great when it's with a mouse. Because originally I had in my mind that 2 type 3 voters, where did my cursor go? 2 type 3 voters could switch to type 2, and I would change the result, but it could just be 1 type 1 voter. So, it is a minimum of 1 voter can change the result of the election by changing their preference. So there's very low resistance to changing a constituent. There's very little institutional resistance to changing the outcome of an election. There might be cultural or societal resistance, but the system itself has low resistance because there's a very low minimum amount of vote change to actually change the result. If that makes sense. Difficulty to form government. Short term, multiple parties could exist. but it's rare for multiple parties in a first past the post system to have significant seat totals. So in other words, you might have to do the odd coalition government. It's not unheard of, but it is rare. In the long term, there's only going to be two real parties, so forming a government is trivial because the party who has the most seats forms government, and there's only two parties. Because naturally, first past the post leads to a two-party system. Now, I am doing the spicy take here. I have first past the post in A tier. I do not think it's the best system in the world. I do not think it is the worst system in the world. But I think it's a solid A tier system. And the reason for this is not like bias or anything. It's based off of, well, I mean, I guess it is because there's some criteria I consider more important than others. But it is based off of these criteria I have listed. To me, the most important criteria are majority winner, monotone, consistency, and participation. And all of these, first past the post satisfies them, and these are all very important. Generally speaking, and I also consider later no harm and help very important, but they do not apply. So, first past the post, I guess, technically passes them, though it's like technical in the most nitpicky sense of the term. So, in this regard, this makes it a good system because voters are encouraged to vote because their vote will always impact their first preference. Or, sorry, not their first preference. They will always be able to get a more preferred winner by voting, which is very important in the electoral system. You don't have weird, unintuitive results that voting for someone you like more can cause someone else you don't like to lose. Or in the case of participation, there are some systems where you can vote in an election and cause your person to lose. That's not good. That is a flaw in a system. Now, it cannot go into A tier or S tier because it does not satisfy the Condorcet criteria, which I do consider an extremely important criteria as well, especially when you're talking about constituency level elections, because if you satisfy the Condorcet tier, you're going to have the most satisfactory local result. But if you do not satisfy the Condorcet winner, you do not have that, which is unfortunate. But that is what holds back first past the post in this. Now, I know some of you are going to say in the comments, but it's not proportional. Well, I'll get into this more when I start covering actual quote-unquote proportional systems. But I do not generally consider proportional to be a goal of an electoral system in and of itself. It is neither a side effect or it's not a happy side effect nor a desired direct effect. Because what happens in first past the post versus other systems is the coalitions form before the election. Whereas in a proportional system, such as, let's say, pick on the Netherlands here, the Netherlands have an open party list system. Coalitions form after the election. In a first past the post election, coalitions form before the election. Now, critics might say the coalitions are more sticky in first past the post, but again, I do not think that is true. If you look at places, again, like the Netherlands, there's a very limited number of parties any other party would align with. Going a bit more broad here, because I don't know the names of all the Dutch parties. There's a billion of them. But going a step broadly here, if we have a simplified system where we have left, center, right, generally speaking, center will happily align with right or left. Right will only align with center, and left will only align with center. So every single election result will have center in it, forming a more centrist party, a more aligned party, and a much more aligned party. that makes sense. So if the center-right is the largest party, they will form a coalition either with the center, the hard right, or both. If the most center party wins, they will form a coalition probably with the center-left, center-right, or possibly center-right and right. And similarly with the left. If the left wins, they'll form a coalition with the center-left and hard-left, or possibly center-left and center. These coalitions happen after the election. First-past-the-post coalitions happen before the election. A first-past-the-post party should not be considered a monolith. Not every single person who votes, in the case of Canada, the Conservative Party, is a fiscal conservative, is a social conservative, is a libertarian, is pro-gun, is pro-life, etc. These are not true. There's clear and distinct factions within the party. Broadly speaking, you have libertarians, you have the Red Tories, you have the social conservatives as the three broad factions. Though you could also argue you have the populist right as another faction, possibly making 4 factions here. These 4 factions are the core ones that make up the party, but they do not always mean the party gets those voters. Sometimes Red Tory voters will vote Liberal. Sometimes social conservative voters will vote for a third party, such as the Christian Heritage Party. Sometimes the Libertarian voters will vote for the People's Party. Or the populist right voters will vote for the People's Party. So they have the 4 factions of the Conservative Party, the 4 main factions, but each of those 4 main factions could vote for a different party. So in a way, the Conservative Party is just a coalition created prior to the election, whereas a proportional system creates those coalitions after the election. Now, that doesn't mean proportional systems are bad. It just means proportionality is not an end of itself. It just exists. It's neither good nor it's bad. I do not like the rhetoric people make where they judge systems by how proportional they are. I do not think that is an accurate or useful or meaningful description of a system. I think all these other criteria that I've listed previously are more satisfactory and more useful for understanding how good a system is. The only reason why some voters get dissatisfied with systems is because they do not actually understand how they work, which is a tragedy because school systems, at least in Canada, do not really explain how the government works, how the electoral process works, how party formation works, how campaigns work. So people don't understand the system, so they get upset. This is not, again, to say first past the post is the best system. In fact, I've only put an A tier because I could there's things that I could want in a system that first past the post does not satisfy, such as, again, Condor Winner / Condor Loser. Those are 2 things that I would like in a system. First past the post does not satisfy it. So it's not the best system. But I do not think it is the terrible system everybody makes it as, because it does satisfy participation, consistency, monotone, majority winner. It's easy to understand as a voter what to do if you want the current guy voted out. It's easy for a government to form. You do not get situations like Belgium did, where they had 687 days without a formed government. That is a flaw in an election system. Your election system can give election results where you cannot form a government. That is a flaw. That is a very, very big flaw. Similarly, you do not get situations like Italy, where parties continually cycle in power. In other words, prime ministers get dropped off and new coalitions form regularly. I think if any Italian viewers exist watching my channel, my analytics say there aren't any, but maybe there are. You might be able to correct me on this. But I believe Italy's had 17 prime ministers this century. It's been 22 years. That is a flaw in the system. You have a very unstable government then. This is not to say, in the case of Italy or Belgium, that necessarily their systems are bad. I'll be probably covering similar systems to theirs later on in the series, and until I really sit down and think a lot about it, I won't really be able to place it. So I'm not going to comment too heavily on them. But it is to say, a lot of the criticism people have of first past the post is wanting a system to do a thing that is not relevant to an electoral system, based out of pure ignorance of how the electoral system, of how elections work. Now, this is not to say any viewer out there who doesn't like first past the post is wrong to dislike it. But it is to say that you have to have a clear criticism of it, and at least to me, the great Canadian bagel, you cannot feel free in the comments to try to argue your case for why proportional is a goal that an electoral system should contain. But I'm very doubtful you'll be able to convince me on that. But feel free over the course of the series, over the course of any particular video, to argue with me why you think, in the comments, why you think I've overrated a system, underrated a system, or if I've neglected a criteria that you could judge an electoral system by, which you think is very important. There are many. I believe there's like 15 or something, or 16. And I have not included all of them, mostly out of time. I don't want to make these videos too long. But, with this all said, first past the post. System number... First past the post. A-tier system. Tune in, I think, next week, barring a lot of polling occurring for either the Canadian election or the Conservative leadership race, for the next video in this series, which will be runoff voting. Runoff voting, to be clear, is like the French election where you have a 2-round system. And just to have one last iteration here, on Thursday, we're doing a live stream to cover the Conservative leadership race, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I hope all of you have time, can join, and I think it'll be a blast. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you Thursday, hopefully.